To know.
Okay. Thank you, Ron. Now you can finally take it away.
Now I can take it away. Okay, one comment I made. I reviewed the film recently because I've seen it before, and I just ran through it again recently to make sure I remembered everything. One of the things I noticed even before the movie started is that Oscar Micheaux had a full production staff. So it seemed, if you look at the credits, he had a director of photographer / cinematographer. He had a recording person, doing that. He had a production assistant and an art director. So last week I was asked the question, well, how much money did he have and how much of an organization? And to me at the time, it seemed like he didn't have a lot. He was operating on the shoestring, and that may very well have been true, but he had enough money to put forth a professional product. And you've seen an example of that. So, if you look at the opening credits, he's got credits there for, people behind the scenes doing a professional job. Mm-hmm. That's something I hadn't noticed before. Okay. The forum is open. Go for it. Go for it. Good. Yeah.
Yeah, I see that Linda has her hand raised.
Go, Linda.
I have to say that I didn't get to the whole end of the film, so I'm anxious to hear how it ends. I came very close, but I was very delighted to see that in 1930, a role was given to a woman as the person who was clever enough to kind of figure things out and find a way to get information. So she had a very special role. And I thought that was kind of neat to see.
That's a good point. I'm glad you brought that out because I wasn't noticing the role of women in that particular film. I will from now on, but you're quite right. Anyone else?
You're frozen.
Who's frozen? Me?
No, it's just probably my computer.
Okay. Anybody else have a comment about the film, one way or the other?
I see a hand raised from Bill and Linda. You can either unmute yourself. Yes. Bill and Linda.
Hey, Ron, how you doing?
Good. How's it going, Bill?
Hey, one thing I wanted to mention was what took me by surprise when I watched the movie. As opposed to most of the early black cinema, because I've seen other movies like that at the time, this movie was a mixture of black people and white people. Normally, if you watch black movies from back then, you used to seeing like Cabin in the Sky or Stormy Weather or anything like that. It's about black people for black people. That's what the target was. That's what you talked about last week. But in this movie, there were just as many white people as black people. So it was showing the society where people were living. It just wasn't what I was expecting. That there were white cops and there were black cops and there were white businessmen and black businessmen. And while the focus was on the black people, we were there too. So.
Mm-hmm. I noticed the same thing, Bill, the second time I watched the movie. I didn't realize that or notice it the first time. And the only comment I have about that, aside from that's a good thing, is that in some of his movies, there were roles that only white people could fill. Okay, so for example, the judge, or if you remember the desk sergeant when that guy gets arrested or whatever, that had to be a white man because I don't think there were too many black desk sergeants in Harlem at the time. Okay,
but there was a black or two black detectives.
Yes, there were two black detectives, and that is surprising as well because you might think, well, there weren't any black detectives. Now, I happen to know there were black detectives at the time, but again, you're right. There were black detectives, but there were also white policemen, and they belonged there. They had to be there. I'm assuming that there were roles that just had to be filled by white people. Otherwise, it would have been very unrealistic.
Yeah.
So I have to wonder, going along with what you were talking about last week, I have to wonder about the effect on the audiences of that. If the purpose of these movies was to provide kind of a relief from normal, everyday, oppressive life for the black population in New York City, and they go to the movies to see black people doing black people things, whatever that means, that the fact that they're still in the situation in this movie where it's a mixed society. It's unusual from what I've seen before.
Yeah, almost kind of what you say. It would have been very unusual to watch a black movie that was unrealistic. And, you know, I'm not sure that back in 1935, they noticed much about the white people in the movie simply because they belong there. In other words, you could walk outside the theater into a police station and see the same thing. So I think that if that desk sergeant and that businessman, the owner of the company, okay, if that person were black, it might have seemed a bit more unrealistic, you know, to the audience. I could be wrong, but that's my thinking, you know, now. But you made a good observation. There are white people.
Yeah.
The movie.
Yeah, we have a question from, is that Linda? I see just Chester Freeman, but is that
Yeah,
Linda?
it's Linda.
Okay.
Yeah. We're sharing our name.
Yeah.
Yes, and they're the bad guys. The white guy's the murderer and the rapist. So.
Oh, there's the end of the movie.
Oh, did you not see the end of the movie? I'm sorry. I thought everybody had watched.
That's okay. It's presumed.
Someone else said
Well,
that.
we did warn you to watch it, and
Yeah.
I will say that it has been out for
That's true.
75 years now.
Yeah, not a big surprise. So they're the bad guys. So what a relief for black people to see the white people cast as the bad guys, right? And also, I just found it fascinating on a lot of different levels. The way that the black people were portrayed. You know, they were professionals. The first guy we meet he's a writer. He's written a novel. He's studying to go to law school. He wants to be a lawyer. The young woman, we don't really know what her career is. We know what he thinks her career is.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously she and her mother are very well read and very educated. And at the same time, economically disadvantaged, that they have to share their housing situation with Cat House, right, in the same building. So, you know, they're not in a separate upscale neighborhood. And, you know, the clothes, their fashionable clothes. I mean, I felt like, you know, when I would see her with the lawyer, that I was kind of, you know, watching, what did I say, to the, you know, any of those detective movies from the 30s, you know, Sam Spade or something, you know, very articulate, well-spoken.
Mm-hmm.
And I have some other thoughts, but I'll let other people talk.
Okay, no, I kind of agree with you. There's kind of a mix in that movie, but you're quite right. The, you know, many, if not most of the black people in the movie are, you know, cultured. They seem educated. They certainly are articulate. And, you know, some of them are professionals. Also, some are not. You know, there are some characters in that movie that, you know, kind of are stereotypical and so on and so forth. But, you know, it must have been uplifting for a black person in 1935 to walk into you know, a movie and watch somebody that is articulate, because all they would see in other movies are black people as maids and, you know, stereotypes and so on and so forth. Anyone else?
I actually had a comment pertaining to that as while we were watching it, and I've read more recent articles talking about the issue of colorism in films.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it was interesting watching this film that the only darker skinned black person was playing this almost caricature role.
Yeah.
And we're kind of early on in our series to kind of tell if that's a theme, because I definitely have read about it happening in more modern films.
Mm-hmm.
But I was wondering if in your research you had come across anything dealing with colorism.
Yes, I have. Oh, yeah. I think I mentioned this in our dance thing, you know, way back in February. But it would not be all that unusual, not so much in this film because I was looking for it, but in other black films, that the villains or the buffoons in the film are really dark skinned.
Yeah.
The heroes are either brown skin or lighter skin.
Mm-hmm.
because even in the Black community, there was prejudice against people with darker and lighter skins. Even in my day in Harlem, back in the 50s and 60s, that was the case. You know, if your skin was light and your hair was straight, and I can talk about that a little bit, but I'll give other people a chance to talk, you were considered on a higher level than if your skin was really dark and your hair was kinky. So that it would not be unusual to see that portrayed in a Black film, you know, produced and directed by a Black person, because Black people did feel that way back then. And to a far lesser degree, you know, we still do.
Yeah.
I see that June has her hand raised.
Yeah, I noticed that the madam sounded very much like Mae West. So what was the timing of this? Was she copying Mae West, or was Mae West copying her?
I think she's copying Mae West.
Okay.
Mae West existed late 20s, early 30s.
Okay.
I would say middle, late 20s, because she was popular during Prohibition. This is after Prohibition, but not by much, only by 7 years or so, or
Okay.
no, less than that. It's 1935. You know, Prohibition came about in 33, 2 years after Prohibition, you know, this sort of thing. But the character of that, you know, Mae West epitomized that particular character in the 20s. She wasn't the only one, but Mae West is the one you would think of today. So yeah, she's copying Mae West. That's my opinion. Next.
Also, if you have any questions and you don't want to be talking for whatever reason, you can also put them in the comments and I can ask for you. But I see that Alan has his hand raised.
First, I'll say I'm on an old desktop computer with no camera.
Oh,
So I didn't deliberately shut out, but I might have an iPad next week. I'll see. We were struck by the fact that the characters' language and speech, I think other people said, was rather sophisticated as far as what we might have been expecting. You know, there was not much at all of a Black overtone to their language. It just seemed so mainstream. Also, I think it was probably the film technology, but at certain points, they really didn't look like Negroes. I mean, their skin tones, a lot of them were quite pale. They really looked very close to the you know, genuine white people in the film. We thought. Let's see, what else did I write here? You know, you mentioned that, especially that more dark-skinned character, and he had a more of a Black accent,
oh yeah.
which, you know, you said stereotypical, but I wonder actually if the Black audience, they maybe knew quite a few people like that guy. I mean, he was not probably foreign to their culture. You know, we all have different people in our lives, so you know, they might have been able to identify with him just as well. Do you think, Ron?
I do think you're absolutely right. Even in my day, we had. Let me just backtrack a little bit. The reason for that is in Harlem, even when Harlem started, you know, back around the turn of the last century.
Yeah.
As a result of the Great Migration, you had Black people who had been in New York for, you know, years, since the time of the Dutch. But you also had a lot of Black people coming up from the South. So in Harlem, you had a mixture of Black people, some from the South, many from the West Indies, okay, and many who had been there for a while. So there would have been a variety of accents, okay? That Black character, and there were certain words that you may not have noticed, but would have been typical of someone fairly uneducated from the South. You know, the way he pronounced certain words or whatever.
Sure, sure.
You would not, it would not be surprising to find people like that in Harlem. Even in my day in Harlem, yeah, you would find people that, recently arrived from the South, mixing in with people who, did not speak that way because they'd never been down South and so on and so forth. So that part of it, I would take as fairly realistic.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Linda.
I just want to counter that a little bit. I saw it as him very much playing to the caricature that was predominant of Black people in white films. That he was playing a character to the white man he was interacting with. And there's a very telling scene where it becomes very obvious. When he walks behind the guy, can't remember the guy's name.
Brisbane.
I think it's Brisbane.
He walks behind him and his whole face changes into a knowledgeable, mature, wise face. And then he comes back into the character that he's playing of the Black doofus guy.
Yeah.
And so that's how I interpreted him, to the point where he's mimicking in Gone with the Wind, the famous scene with I don't know how but birth and no babies. He's mimicking that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really took it that was, he was really playing up that caricature that was so predominant in that time of the Black person.
Maybe so, but there is another scene in the movie where they're both standing outside the factory, and Brisbane is telling, the guy that he wants him to sit on the stool down the stairs or whatever. And then Brisbane goes inside, and the character you're referring to is alone.
Yeah, and he
goes into this kind of, jig dance or whatever that you would expect an ignorant Black person to do, and there's nobody around. So he's not playing up to anybody. To me, he is reverting to the person that he is. Although you do have a point, realistically, there were Black people that played up to the stereotype that white people expected them to be. If they wanted to be successful, they kind of had to do that. So you do have a point, but at least in my opinion, I think that character was, supposed to be an ignorant, Negro character.
But there was once, yeah.
Sorry, Linda, someone has their hand raised.
Right,
Someone
okay.
raised their hand. Ruth. Ruth, you're good. Ruth Malloy.
Similarly, in the office scene where Brisbane is dictating the notes
Mm-hmm.
to Lou, is it Lou or Len, who's the character, the other character in the scene? They get to the word Negro, and Brisbane corrects his spelling, and Lou gets a very wry expression, and he looks out of the corner of his eye and he says, "Don't you mean, Mr. Brisbane, that there should be 2 G's here?" Referring to the pejorative.
Yes.
And it was just a great little twist that he was giving Brisbane.
Yeah, I did notice that, and you are quite right. He is spelling out Nigger rather than Negro. Yeah. Very subtle.
Right.
I'm glad you picked up on that, because I did notice that and forgot it. So
Yeah, because I think he also said it should be an I instead of an E.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nigger. Yeah, instead of Negro. Yes, you are quite right. I did pick up on that, and I forgot it. Yeah, you're right. Other questions, comments? These are good.
Hand raised from Bill.
Go, Bill.
Yeah, going along with that point, there was another moment earlier in the film that I got a laugh out of. In the ridiculous scheme that the Catbird had, where she and her cohort would lure people to the lobby of the house and then clock them over the head to rob them, and then get rid of the bodies. I mean, it's a great scheme. that's going to work for a long time.
You're
But
right.
there was a comment made by the guy at one point when they first hit the main character. I don't remember what his name was, the lawyer or the writer. He looks down and he says, "Oh, great! I hit a black guy. I'm not going to get any money that way."
Yeah, yeah, you're right. That I do remember that scene as well. Yeah. You see, what comes out, it seems to me, in a lot of these movies, is the conception / prejudice that Black people have against Black people. Keep in mind, Black people also victimized Black people back then, and today too. You know, this sort of thing. Black people also, as I mentioned before, had opinions about other Black people that they looked down on, and so on and so forth. So, you know, in Black society then and now, but we're talking about then, there is a stratification where there is a pecking order. You know, there is a prejudice against certain Black people because of the color of their skin, the way they speak, and so on and so forth. It's kind of akin to, if you're going to beat me down, then I'm going to look for someone to beat down so that I can feel better about beat down. You know, so I think there's a bit of that in it.
I just have to say that's the Chris Christopherson song. But you need somebody to look down on.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I saw some hands raised. Betty.
Well, I also feel it's the same in white society.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That, you know, we definitely, I guess it's taught and learned. Some people feel better by putting other people down. So,
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
right.
Yeah, you're right. And you're going to see that in film because to them, and still, it's realistic. It would have seemed a bit phony if all the Black people in the film were pretty much all the same. You know, whether that would be very noble or very stereotypical or whatever. If they're all the same, it would not have seemed realistic to the people watching the film.
I see you, June. You have your hand raised.
Yeah,
Want
it's
to
the
say one
same.
word? Can I
It
just
was
say
the same
one?
it was the same with the Jewish immigration. The people who had been in this country a long time looked very much down upon the recent Jewish immigrants who came at the turn of the last century. There was a real hierarchy among that population also.
Yeah, I'm sure. And Bill reminded me about a week ago about Yiddish films and whatnot, which I knew nothing about. And I'd love to see some of those films to see if, you know, some of the things that we're talking about here
It would be the
also
same.
show up in Yiddish theater, in Yiddish cinema.
Yeah.
You know, so on and so forth. I'd be very curious about that.
Any middle child will tell you that that's just basic human nature, that shit rolls downhill.
Yeah.
Two things really quick. One, if you're moving around a lot, if you could mute yourself while you're doing so. I know you have to adjust or move to another room. While you're doing so, if you could mute your mic because we're hearing a lot of background noise. The second is, I think the word we are kind of and the concept we're kind of discussing throughout this is intersectionality. There's a race issue, but there's also a class issue happening in this film as well.
Yeah, good point. Yeah. And I haven't thought of it that way, but you're right. You know, race and class, you know, mix the two together and you get what you saw.
Yeah. Okay, Betty, I see you have your hand raised.
Well, I am reminded of a flaw that I saw in my mother for the first time when I was in kindergarten, and my best friend was Barbara Glantz, and she was Jewish, and I was from Saginaw, Michigan, and she was my only Jewish friend. And my mother had a hard time allowing me to go to a birthday party because of her prejudiceness, and it was like shocking to me. And of course, now I know many Jewish people, having moved to New York 40 years ago. But yeah,
Yeah, I see. Alan has a question. Hey, Alan.
I want to comment about the production, the quality, and I haven't watched a lot of films made in 1935. Probably some old comedies, like you said, Mae West, and I don't know how far back those go. But Obviously, it wasn't up to, today's standards, and there were some, we thought, kind of awkward scene transitions. There were places where there was incontinuity. We kind of got lost, I think. We thought maybe we missed a scene. And also, the dialogue, I think, is a bit stilted, and the way they speak their lines. What's your experience with that kind of thing in these old movies, Ron?
Well, I figure, the way I feel about it is that, and when I first, viewed the movie, from a technological point of view, Micheaux seemed to be at least 5 years behind the times. If you look at a dare I say, white movie, a Hollywood movie, I'll put it that way, from 1935, you would not have seen the discontinuity or whatever, that sort of thing. It would have been, I don't know, more professional, more technically put together and this sort of thing. You would not have seen what you saw. Micheaux is working on a shoestring, and I think he did remarkably well, given the fact that he probably didn't have a lot of money, and he certainly didn't have the Hollywood backing that, Hollywood films, obviously had. Not only that, and I think I mentioned this last week, if you look at the opening credits, I'm willing to bet you didn't see one name that you recognized.
Right.
If you were watching a Hollywood movie, you would have seen not only the stars, but certain people in the background whose names you would recognize or whose faces you would recognize once you saw the movie. So what Micheaux and other Black filmmakers of the time are working with are probably part-time actors, stage actors, entertainers, this sort of thing. These are not Hollywood stars. These are not people trained for Hollywood as the studio system, would have done even in 1935. Like I mentioned last week, the James Cagneys, the Claudette Colberts, et cetera. Pick your movie star, but they're movie stars. They're manufactured. In Black films, they're not manufactured. They're almost people off the street, but not quite. Like I said, I'm guessing a lot of them are stage actors or stage entertainers, dancers, singers, whatever. And that's who Micheaux had to draw on. One of my questions is, how did he get those white people? Where'd they come from? He had to hire them. They're in the movie, this sort of thing. It seems to me they would have had more access to Hollywood. So how come they're in a relatively low budget, Black film in 1935? That's a question I have that I haven't been able to answer.
Ruth had her hand raised, and then we'll get to you, Chester.
I think part of the answer to that question is that the white people, except for the little boy who comes in at the end, Epps's little brother or a friend, they were all older and had probably had inroads during the silent era. And you could see the silent era expression on the older actors, whether they were Black or white. You could see the expression in their faces and the way that they use their faces as compared to the delivery of the lines.
Yeah, they had to use their faces in the silent era to depict emotion, depict whatever, this sort of thing. The old stereotype of, being, of a screen test. All right, show me love, show me fear, show me anger, and the exaggerated faces. So yeah, you're right, But that's what we had to do.
I think that was really clear with Epps's mother. When she comes in at the end, she was so dramatic. It was almost as though she was in a horror film.
Today we would call that overacting, but
right.
Quite.
But then it was a necessity.
Yeah.
Okay, Chester, you had a question.
Yes, well, an observation. After we finished watching the movie, I went back to the credits, and I went on Google and I IMDb'd all of the actors, not all of them, but the main actors. And their credits were pretty much confined between 1933 and 1938. They had a handful of movies, and then they disappear completely, including the white actor, the guy that played Brisbane. He basically disappears after, I think, 1940. So it's almost as if and all of them appeared in a handful of movies, almost all of them by Micheaux. And so it's almost as if when he starts to disappear, they kind of went with him. They had a handful of movies and then they were gone, according to IMDb.
Yeah, I didn't realize that. I'm glad you did that, Chester. I did not think of looking up these people. To me, they were just unknown actors. Micheaux really began to disappear in the 40s, and by the late 40s, he was passé. Yeah. So I imagine the people that, he had worked with were also gone as well. It'd be interesting to, in future movies, to check the cast to see how many people, like you say, how many people that appeared in this movie also appeared in our next movie, Lying Lips, and subsequent movies down the line. I'm thinking that Micheaux had his own repertoire company, so to speak, where he could draw from this, from this sector, that sector, whatever, whenever he needed to. I'd like to check the cast of characters from different Micheaux movies to find out if that's the case. Good observation. Yeah, Linda.
Now, I just want to say how much I appreciate Ruthie's observation about that these older actors coming off the silent era, because as I think about it, that's exactly what I looked at that older woman. I thought, wow, I could be watching a silent movie.
Yeah.
But it didn't kind of click until you just said it now, Ruthie. So thank you for that observation.
Yeah, that's a very good observation. I didn't think of it that way, but that old woman, yeah, that's right out of the silent era. Right out of the. Keep in mind, silent movies really didn't come to the fore until the very late 20s, early 30s. First one was 27, but it took a couple of years for sound movies to really, begin to come into their own. So 1929, 1930, and this is 1935. So there are probably a lot of actors around, from the silent era, who probably had trouble getting, work in talkies for a variety of reasons. And, Micheaux found some of them.
Right. I'd also have to imagine it's the same trickle-down effect of new technology, and that oftentimes when a huge new technological innovation comes out, the independent filmmakers, the people who are lower on that chain, are not necessarily going to get the highest standard of the technology that's coming out. It takes a few years for that to kind of, okay, now that it's not so new, so expensive, and a little more regular, it becomes a little more accessible.
Yeah, that's kind of what I meant when I said that Micheaux's about at least 5 years behind the times in terms of technology. He just didn't have access to it, nor could he afford it. This sort of thing. Not only that, a lot of that stuff, and this goes back to the very early days of cinema, a lot of that stuff is under patent, and you had to pay to get that technology. And if you didn't have the money, okay, then you didn't have that technology, which is one reason the movie industry moved from New York to Hollywood. Because at the time, and we're going back before 1910, if you wanted to make a movie in New York, you had two problems. Number one, most of the technology you used was patented. And the people that patented charged you for that. And they charged you a lot for that. The other was the syndicate. Basically, these are gangsters that are shaking you down. You want to show a movie here? Well, you got to pay us. Otherwise, there might be an accident in your theater or whatever. So for that reason, they moved out of New York. They moved to Florida first. Problems in Florida. It's too hot, too many bugs. Then they moved to Cuba. Problem with Cuba, malaria. And then they moved to Los Angeles, near what is now Hollywood. Not so much for the weather. That was an extra bonus. They moved to Hollywood because if the syndicate or the people that owned the patents wanted to chase them 3,000 miles to California, they could hop over the border to Tijuana and be clear. So that's why California, turned out to be the place to be if you wanted to make movies and use whatever technology, you could buy rather than have to rent or, whatever. Micheaux just did not have that luxury. He had to work with what he had. I think he did very well with what he had. But like I said, what I, saw was him at least 5 years behind the times in technology, so that's just the way it was.
I see Ruth has another comment or question.
That's a really, really interesting piece of information right there. The accessibility to hop over to the other side of the border.
Yeah, that's why.
What I wanted to say,
yeah,
what I did want to bring up is that Rudolph Valentino never made it into talkies because he had a horrible speaking voice.
So did a lot of people.
And
yeah,
yeah, that's right. It happened to a lot.
Yeah, I have done a lot of research in that, over the years, and silent movies were not silent. In the making of silent movies, depending on the amount of money put into production, there might be a whole orchestra playing mood music for the actors to get them in the mood to, act the way they needed to without using their voices. And even in the theaters, there might be a whole orchestra playing music to accompany the silent film. And even in the cheaper theaters, you had a piano or an organ to do the same thing. When talkies came in and they were there to stay, there were a whole host of silent movie stars who were just out of luck. Either they had terrible accents that just did not fit the characters that they were used to playing. Some of them couldn't speak English at all. They didn't have to in silent movies, so there were just a lot of people that were just eliminated. You never saw them again, simply because they just didn't fit in talkies. Usually it was a voice thing. It was also part of the technology. Until they got the technology right, your normal speaking voice would not come off as your normal speaking voice on screen. It might, if you read anything about John Gilbert, who was a swashbuckler pre-Errol Flynn, pretty much the reason he got axed out, although he kind of slid out, by the middle 30s, he had probably drunk himself to death. But the reason was, in that first movie, Talkie, because he was a silent screen star, he sounded like Mickey Mouse. And pretty much got laughed out of the industry. He never lived that down. There's a whole story about that I won't go into, but like I said, there were a lot of silent screen actors who were stars that disappeared almost overnight when talkies were here to stay.
Linda Wells has a question or a comment.
Yeah. Let's see, what was I going to say? It was something about the voices, yes.
Mm-hmm.
So the women's voices were also very high.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember that from early Hollywood movies as well. If I closed my eyes, I wouldn't have known that this was a Black movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The voices and the phrasing and the whole thing was so reminiscent. I mean, this is the first Black movie that I've seen.
Yeah.
From that period, but I've certainly seen other movies, and I was struck by how similar they sounded, the voices.
Yeah, well, keep in mind, there's not a lot of reason for them to sound dissimilar. There is no one Black accent, like there is no one white American accent or whatever. So, there's a very good reason why people, kind of sound quote unquote normal and not stereotypical. If you had watched a movie from years earlier, an early sound movie, you might have heard something different, because the old acoustic microphones, no longer in use by 1935, would not pick up certain sounds. For example, the letter R would not be easily picked up. So you had to roll your R's. There's certain recordings blues singers, whatever, who, you would have to roll their R's in order for the R sound to be heard. That's one example. So again, we're back to technology and so on and so forth. But the way you speak, in a movie like this, it's really the actor, who speaks that way or who is trying to speak that way, etc. And it comes across very well in this particular film. But if you go back a little earlier, they had to speak a certain way in order for, the sound that you needed to hear to come through the mic.
So I was just wondering whether that high-pitched sound, the women particularly, was something, was that related to technology, or was it something that was considered attractive at the time?
I don't know.
That way.
I don't know. I assume, and this is just an assumption off the top of my head, that, back then, women wanted to sound feminine. Now, as I say that, if you look at a Hollywood film, that isn't the case. Bette Davis didn't sound that way, now did she? So why that happened in, this Black film, if not other, Black films, I honestly don't know. It's a good point.
Yeah, but it's not just the Black film. It's the period. I mean, I think Bette Davis was more of an exception. I think a lot of the ingenues, the women playing these young, attractive women, had these kind of high-pitched voices. They were little girl voices, is what they were.
Betty Boop.
Yeah, Betty Boop. Yeah. And I think you're talking about the secondary actors, because the stars did not sound that way. Betty Davis, Ed Colbert, Joan Crawford. They certainly didn't sound like that.
Yeah, the little,
Yeah, but the actors did, sound that way. And I think that was stereotypical and part of the script, or part of the character, put it that way.
I do wonder, this is slightly off topic, if when you were talking about how they had to speak to be picked up by the microphones, it became well known that there was like a mid-Atlantic accent that started to be used in film. And I'm wondering if that came about as a result of having to speak a certain way to be picked up by the microphone. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about. It was one weird article I read one time. But.
Yeah, I'm guessing no. I think it probably was that way for to be recognized by a general audience. I'll give you an example of that. In television, the newscasters that they picked, the Walter Cronkites, et cetera, in part, now they were real newsmen, but they were picked in part because they had a Midwestern accent that was recognized everywhere. They would not have picked somebody from Brooklyn or somebody from Mississippi or whatever. So it was kind of a mid-American accent that everybody could relate to. Anything else? One thing I did notice that you probably didn't, and it's a Black affectation. Did you notice the hairstyles, particularly of the men? Okay. Many of them had what you would consider kinky hair. Some did not. If you remember the dance sequence, when they're in the nightclub or wherever it is, and, this sort of thing. Some of the men had straight hair. Does anybody know what that is? Anybody know why? I do, but I'm just wondering if anybody else is on the same track I am.
Pomade.
Who said pomade?
I did.
You're close. You're close. Did you ever hear of the process of conking? Also called process. There was, and I remember this as a kid, this goes into the 60s, but back then, there was a tendency for some Black people to want to resemble white people in a way. I already mentioned that if your skin was light, you had an advantage even in the Black community. If your hair was straight or straightened, you quote unquote looked better or more attractive even to Black people, if not, white people. So there was a way of straightening your hair if you were male. it involved the use of eggs and lye and other ingredients that you would put in your hair, okay, that would straighten it, okay? And that's what you saw in the film for not all of the characters, but some of the characters, you know, had straight hair. You would see this in the gangsters who really tried to look slick and smooth or whatever. Even the women straighten their hair, you know, and that, you know, if you were to pick up, even in the 50s and 60s, Ebony Magazine or Jet, what you found predominantly were hair straightening products for women. So it goes into trying to look better. If a child was born with naturally straight hair, you know, he was said to have good hair, you know, meaning that if your hair was kinky, that wasn't good hair. You know, you looked more Negro, okay? And this person had quote unquote white qualities. So in a lot of Black films, that's what you're gonna see, okay? You're gonna see some Black characters with straight hair that isn't natural, and other characters that have the normal hair that, you know, Black people are supposed to have. So that's, now I just wanted
Well,
to
I bet you that's even, unfortunately, probably true today.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure part of it has to do with enough genetic mixing that people come out with whatever hair they do.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's still present.
Oh, absolutely.
I can count that a little bit. I can counter that. When Black started being beautiful in the middle 60s.
Oh, I remember big afros.
That's my point.
Yeah.
You know, when that started, and that started in the middle 60s, around 65, 66 or whatever, and James Brown personified it in the anthem, you know, Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud. In a way, it was like, we ain't doing this anymore. You know, it's almost like the seesaw was, you know, turned one way, and now we're going to turn it all the way the other way by being as Black as possible. So rather than straightening our hair, we're going to grow our hair out. So you saw afros as big as beach balls, you know, people wandering around with, you know, all sorts of, you know, whatever to personify their African heritage rather than hiding it for God knows how long, you know, sometimes out of necessity and sometimes just out of, you know, habit.
Well, Angela Davis and, you know, her presence with that great hair.
Yeah, you know. You know, speaking of movie stars, take a look at Sammy Davis Jr. in his early films and whatnot. He's got processed hair.
Yeah.
Then take a look at later Sammy Davis Jr. with his afro. How'd that happen? You know, well, Black was now beautiful, and people that had processed hair were looked down upon as being sellouts or whatever. And if you didn't have an afro and you weren't wearing a dashiki, and, you know, if you weren't personifying your Africanness, you weren't being Black.
Yeah, but my point was only in this century, you know, like, look at Kamala Harris.
Yeah, oh yeah, sure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think many women today still straighten their hair.
They do, but now the seesaw has almost evened out, because you see, you know, women with, you know, afros. They're not out, you know, there, but they're still there. And, you know, then you do see people, you know, women particularly with hair that is relatively straight, you know, this sort of thing. You know, when was the last time you saw a man with a big afro? When was the last time you saw anybody wearing a dashiki? So the, you know, the seesaw again has, you know, it's still teetering, but it's not all this way where, you know, we're Black and we're proud to the point of, you know, putting it in your face. But getting back to the film, it's 1935, okay? And in the Black community, not just Harlem, but any Black community, you have people who are, you know, I don't want to say emulating white, but the straighter your hair is, the lighter your skin is, the better off you are in the world.
I saw two hands go up. Linda, I saw your hand go up a while ago, and I want to make sure we get to you.
Yeah, this is back when we were talking about the conking of the hair and the lie, and there's a scene in Malcolm X.
Yes, I
actually,
know
where he
that
does
scene.
that. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a funny scene because for those that haven't seen, Malcolm X, who's the actor that plays him? I just had a brain.
Denzel Washington.
Denzel Washington plays Malcolm X as I guess he's in his early 20s or whatever, or maybe even younger, and he's conking his hair. And his best friend, played by Spike Lee, is helping him do it. And he's got his head in the sink, he's got the lye and the eggs and all of that sort of thing. And he says, my scalp is burning. And Spike Lee says, yeah, that's how you know it's working. And just at that moment, the cops burst in to arrest him for whatever. And, Denzel Washington is practically begging them to let him wash this stuff out of his hair, and no go. They're taking him down to the station, and he's got this, burning lye on his head or whatever. But that's, back then, that's what you did. Even in the 50s and 60s, I remember friends of mine doing exactly that. So it took a while to die out.
Oh, we lost Betty. She was the next person to have a question. I do want to say we are at 8 o'clock. I don't want to pressure anyone that they have to leave, but just as just to let you know what the time is.
Time flies when you're having fun. Yeah, if anybody else has anything to say, any other questions or comments, whatever else you may have seen in that the film. One comment I have to make about the plot: it twisted. At first I didn't know what happened to that woman. I thought Brisbane, killed her, and come to find out it was her boyfriend that did it. Oops, I gave it away again. But you didn't find that out until the end of the movie. That was a plot twist, for me. So I don't know if anybody else felt that way, but I thought Brisbane was the villain. And he was to a degree, but he didn't kill her.
Mm-hmm.
Different kind of villain. I see Alan has his hand raised.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Alan, do you want to unmute yourself?
Sorry.
That's okay.
I was going to say, I'm glad you brought that up, Ron, because we love the plot. Lately, I've been watching with my sister-in-law a lot of Perry Mason's and Old Murder, She Wrote.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, they always, misdirect you. They make you think, you know who the murderer is. And then you've got this little, switch at the end. I thought that was a great part. It was a really good mystery.
Yeah.
Also, I think I'm going to have to leave soon, Ron. Now, did you mention the movie we need to watch for next time? What's our next assignment?
Yeah, it's called Lying Lips, 1989.
Okay.
I think there's a write-up about it, or will be, in the library newsletter.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, good.
So it should be there. But in case it's not, it's Lying Lips.
Okay.
And we will discuss that in a month. I think that's, November 4th is when we're going to get together to do this again for that movie. So you have a whole month. You got a whole month.
Not next week. No, November 4th is our next meeting?
Yeah, from now on, we'll meet monthly.
Okay, good. All right.
Otherwise, we'll go to movies.
In case there's anyone else who has to jump out, because I understand we've gone an hour and you have to leave. I will be sending out, this is all being recorded. So once the link for this is live on our YouTube page, I will send out another email to the History of Black Film email list that I have that has the link for the discussion we had tonight. And we'll also tell you how to access Lying Lips for next time. So if anyone, I just wanted to get that information out to anyone who has to leave. I see you, Betty, and you're back, and I want to give you a chance.
Well, I just wanted to say that I was blown off. There must be big wind here, so goodbye if that happens again, because it's blowing out here in Kerhonkson. I wish I could remember what Black comedian I watched in the last 2 days that had a whole, I can't remember who it was, but he had a whole thing about women and their wigs, Black women and their wigs, and it was pretty funny.
Yeah.
Um,
What can I say? I just want to give a shout out to John Girolico, our the library director here. Hi, John. How you doing? I'm glad you're here.
Who got stuck in another virtual meeting and had to be late, but I couldn't leave.
Hate it when that happens.
Why I disappeared briefly, I checked our web calendar. If you go for the details of, this is for Alan, there is a description of the next movie and a couple of actors' names and so on. We're going to try to do that for everyone.
Thank you, John. Great. Okay.
Yeah, you know, John, I don't know how easy or hard this is, but I keep going back to the newsletter, and anything that can be on the regular website, I think is really helpful.
Well, this is.
Yeah.
But you have to go to the calendar, right? And then the calendar itself, not the little list of things, and there's always a little thing you click for details.
Oh, okay, good. I'll do that.
And Margaret always makes sure that we have it right. She checks. And then she tells me, John, do this, and I do it.
Thank you, Margaret.
Anything else about the movie?
Bill is hanging in there. I
Oh,
see
Bill.
you, Bill.
Yeah, I'm hanging in here. Just because we were talking about the plot and the plot twists a couple of minutes ago, I wanted to mention that there was something, and I don't remember what it was, there was something in the movie that made me go back and it was really familiar, so I went and checked on it. Turns out that Micheaux based this movie on a real event. That there was a murder in 1913 of a woman named Mary Fagan, and a fellow by the name of Leo Frank was accused of doing it, and the movie and the real story doesn't work out the same. So the ending is definitely changed. It's a lot more tragic in the in the real story, and it wasn't a black-white thing. It was a Jewish, not Jewish thing in the real story. And if anybody's interested in that, you may want to check that out. This movie was remade because I knew that story from a subsequent movie. 2 years later, in '37, there was a studio movie called, I think it's called They'll Never Forget, or They Won't Forget, or something like that. It was Lana Turner's first movie. She plays the murder victim. And that was the movie where, if this isn't a reason to watch the movie, that's the movie where she gets the reputation. The nickname is the Sweater Girl. If you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's great because they changed the plot in that one too, and that's more closely aligned with the original story in terms of what happened. But this movie and the plot twists in this movie are very close to the real history, and it doesn't exist on its own. There's at least one other movie version of it.
Oh, good. That reminds me of something. I wonder if anybody else noticed this, but it's the scene where Brisbane is talking with his, black employee. And Brisbane says, well, he's going to call the police. And the employee is deathly afraid of him doing that.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you picked up on that, but there's a reason for that.
Absolutely.
It's 1935. And the reason, he's afraid of that is that if the police think that a black man killed a white woman, he is not going to get a fair trial anywhere in America. He is deathly afraid of that. And keep in mind, the character is from the South, where, if people get wind that he might have, killed this white woman, he's not even going to get a trial. He's going to get lynched. And that was something that, most black people lived with, even if they've never been down South. The black press would print, anytime a black man got lynched or killed or whatever, the black press would print another black man was lynched today. And either give the details or not, depending on the, the circumstances. And what I tell people, and this is kind of a sad commentary, is that 1949 was a pivotal year in black history. And people ask why, what happened in 1949? It was the first year in the 20th century where a black man was not lynched. somewhere in the United States.
Ah,
So back in 1935, this was, something you lived with. Even if it never happened to you, you knew it happened to somebody. And if you were, caught up in a capital crime that involved murder of a white person, particularly a white woman, and you were a black male, you had reason to fear. No matter where you were in the country, you had reason to fear.
Yeah,
well, I wonder-
I'd like
Well-
to say,
Well, Linda's had her hand raised for a while now, so I want to
Okay,
give
go
her.
ahead. Let Carol go
You're
ahead.
fine, okay.
oh, okay, just really quickly, I think it's called the Equal Justice Museum in Montgomery,
Mhm.
which I sadly, and many other people do too, refer to as the Lynching Museum.
Mm.
It's just, the Equal Justice Museum is something everybody ought to see.
yeah, I
And
don't
the
think
other
it's
thing I
called
wanted-
that.
I'm sorry?
I don't think it's called that. I was there last October and I could find the name. I just can't remember.
Yeah, just close enough that people could Google it, because it is well worth the trip. But the other thing I wanted to say is, I think that, what's his name, Leo Frank,
Mhm.
Jewish fellow, who was also lynched,
Mhm. Yeah.
seriously. Real minority of all the terrible lynchings that happened, but he was.
True, he was dragged out of jail by the crowd.
Yeah.
Lynch.
Right, yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, but
You have the name of the museum?
I do. I don't have it on my fingertips, but I'll have it. I'll send it to Margaret.
yeah, I've heard of it. My point
Incredible.
was that for all black people, especially back then, this does not include me because I didn't grow up with this, but they did. Black people were routinely lynched back in the 30s up through the 40s. It began to wane in the 50s, this sort of thing. So you will see that pop up in films, and it's a very small thing. I don't know if you noticed it or not in this film, but when he says, or when the black character, even thinks that Brisbane might get the police involved and blame him for the murder, he is more fearful than he normally would be.
Right. And that persists today.
Right.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Sadly.
Yeah. That's the case. So.
I just wanted to quickly say it is the Equal Justice Initiative that founded both the Legacy Museum and the National Memorial for Peace and Justice.
The National Museum for Peace and Justice is
Thank you.
where all
Yeah,
those
yeah.
are hanging.
Good. Okay.
They're all hanging, and then they're also on the ground. And I mean, you can go look up May 31st, 1951 and see all the names of the Oklahoma disaster when they wrecked and they burned the black successful business area.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to say I knew it was the white guy. That really quick little incident where he looks at a picture of women in, I don't know if they had on braziers or what.
Looking at
Yeah.
women in bathing suits or whatever and this sort of thing. Yeah.
I thought, that's so weird.
Yeah, that's I did not pick up on that. I was completely fooled by the fact that he did it. I thought it was Brisbane. So
Well, now I'm going to have to watch the ending.
yes, you should watch the.
No, but you really didn't quite give it away. You really just said it wasn't going to be Brisbane. So that was enough for me to have to watch the end of the movie.
You got to watch the end.
I better do it soon before the debates start.
Oh, that's true.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you so much, Ron. This was really interesting.
No, thank you. I mean, I may have had a lot to say. In fact, I said more than I, intended to, but it's your comments. Like I said at the outset, there's no such thing as a good or bad comment or a question that, shouldn't be answered or whatever. And a lot of what I'm giving you is my opinion, based on, what I know. and I may be 2 steps ahead of you guys in terms of, you know, Black movies and such like that, but that's not very far. So I intend to learn a lot from what you say. You've already said a lot that I just didn't see in the film, you know, or didn't notice or whatever, you know, this sort of thing. So I'm getting a lot out of this, believe me.
Thanks.
That's good.
Good night,
Thank you very
everybody.
much. Yeah, this
is
was
a
a great
good place.
discussion.
Good night.
Yeah.
A good place to wrap this up. Just as a reminder, as soon as the YouTube link is available for this discussion, I will email it out to everyone as well as the information they're going to need for next month. If you are already on our email list, if you've already signed up for these, you don't have to email us again. We'll email you the link.
Oh, good. Good.
Right.
And just thank you so much to Ron for doing the research. It's getting late. For doing the research and pulling this all together for us. And I encourage you to check out the web calendar, not only for information about next month's meeting, but to also check out all the other wonderful events that the library will be hosting.
Oh, thank you very much. Chester, one thing, Linda asked me to send her a list of, you know, when we're going to be meeting monthly, and I just haven't done that yet because I haven't figured it out yet. But it should be the 2nd Wednesday of every month, and I will send her those dates. But unless there's any great objection or, you know, they falls on some holiday that, you know, prevents it all, it should be the 2nd Wednesday of every month.
But not next time. It's the 4th. Didn't you say it was the 4th?
It is going to be the 4th. We'll email you all the information and we'll send a reminder.
It's the 4th of the month. Yeah, that's right. The 4th of the month is the first Wednesday, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because because One Book, One New Pulse is the 2nd week of November.
Okay. I
We'll
guess
send
when the
out-
committee meets again, we'll revisit that because it's kind of important. But yeah, the next one is the 4th. And if necessary, we'll just keep announcing it, you know, a month in advance or whatever. But I think I should have a whole list. And I forget whether we said the 2nd Wednesday or the 1st Wednesday. So John, help me out here.
Yeah, I was gonna say, we'll let you decide and then we'll just do it.
Yeah, why don't we do it that way? Okay.
Right, and thank you again. It's great, Ron.
Not a problem, not a problem. I loved it. Hope to see you again, you guys again in a month, and most of you I'll see sooner.
Bye.
All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Very
Thank
nice.
you.
Take care now.